Hello everyone. Today's lecture is on Cisco devices and Cisco IOS. Although we talk about Cisco devices here, the architecture of these network devices, whether it's routers or switches, in most common environments, they are quite similar. So one reason we are looking into Cisco device is because the simulator that we are going to be using in this course is based on Cisco. It's Cisco Packet Tracer, which is a quite nice tool if you want to have some hands-on experience on router, switches, configuration, basic network design, as well as configuration and implementations. So this lecture or this class is more based on a practical approach. So just run through these slides and we'll have to be uh, logging into the link given to download Cisco Packet Tracer. After installation, you can run the software and watch the next video so that you'll know basic operations of Cisco IOS. There is another lab kind of lecture slide within this folder, so you can look through those and follow some of the commands after completing the other video. So moving on. So what is iOS? It's like any operating system, the operating system of one of the operating systems of Cisco devices. So it's a bit on low end, but there are other types of operating systems for higher end devices. But for our case, as an introduction to networks, devices, as well as their configuration, CLI based approach, iOS is quite good, and it's always good to start with the CLI based approach so that we would understand what we are actually learning throughout the course instead of going about a GUI. So every iOS has a version. Actually, the current version is 15.8. It's not 15.3, is a bit older version, but the naming convention comes with, it starts with the platform type. Platform is the type of device, the type of router or the switch that we are, that this OS is compatible with. Then the feature set, memory location, and those kind of things, as well as the release number. And if we are looking at a layer 3 device or layer 2 device, the switches or routers that we are going to be using in this course will be running iOS on them. And mostly these devices are modular, especially the routers. They come in, if you see the back of it, this is one of the models of routers. It's what called Cisco 2900 series router. It has different interface slots as well as some built-in ports. The built-in ports are for a few things. One is the console port, where you use your serial cable to access the device before it has any configuration. The other is auxiliary port, which is also serves a similar purpose. And the Ethernet ports are the ones that we are going to be using to connect our network to it. And these slots are actually used for expanding your interfaces. So let's say for this case we have only two interfaces. In most cases it won't be enough. So we need expansion ports. So for that purpose only we are going to be using these expansion slots. So in different types of routers or switches, the way that you operate is slightly different. So in that case, I mean, in that sense, Cisco 2900 series or the low end series routers, you'll need to power off before you plug in a module, and those kind of simple operation guidelines are there. But higher end XR, things like that, you don't need to do that. These are production or telco grade routers. The other type of interface that we will be seeing at some point in the courses as well serial ports, which we don't practically use these days because they are quite slow. If you talk about serial, it's very slow and it's an old tech. So right now what we use, if you have seen the previous lectures, they are mostly on fast Ethernet 100 Mbps or gigabit Ethernet or even higher. This is the architecture of router. The most important part is of course its CPU, and after that there are a few other components that you need to pay attention to. First is the flash, the next is envirom, the boot ROM, and then we have the RAM. After that we have the interface ports here as well as the control interfaces here, the console and those things. So what are these? Each of these ROMs or memories have a certain functionality. So like that, flash is consisted of the OS, iOS actually, and NVRAM is handling rather keeping the startup configuration, what we call, or routers configuration, where even if you power off the router, whatever is in NVRAM will not be erased by unless you erase them manually, of course. Then you have the RAM. We'll see later in the lecture as well. There are two states of the configuration file in iOS. One is running configuration, which is the unsaved configuration, if you may. And the other is the startup configuration, which is whatever configuration you have saved to the router. So during a boot up, router will take only the startup configuration and it will discard anything that's not saved. So whichever is in the RAM will be erased if you experience a power outage. So whatever configuration you do, it's quite important for you to save that configuration and before you move away from your router. And the next one is boot ROM. This is sort of like an emergency small OS, a basic OS, I would say, which is used in emergencies to recover certain functionalities of the router. And you have the Ethernet ports, the WAN ports or serial ports or those things. Console is, as I said before, the serial interface to the router, which you would be using for initial configuration in most cases. Once telnet and things like remote access is set up, you won't be using console unless all those fails, of course. So what we talked about before, RAM, DRAM or random access memory, it has the non-saved configuration, and whatever is there will be erased after you power off and power on the router. Then flash is where the iOS is stored. NVRAM is where your permanent configuration or the saved configuration is stored. We spoke about interfaces. Physical interfaces are one thing, and there are telnet and SSH. I'm sure you would have heard about telnet, but telnet is remote CLI. You can actually, it's better if you always configure this on a router so that you don't have to go to router to access it every time, or even if it's a switch. So it's a remote CLI access. So moving on, the configuration files are where your whatever commands that you run are stored in the configuration file, and it's in Cisco, in the case of Cisco IOS, it's a clear text file. So you can actually read it, yes. Startup configuration has whatever you have saved, and running configuration is whatever you have not saved but made changes to. So further on configuration files, you can read up on them, how they are run to the router. First of all, when the router boots up, it goes to a mode called post. Post is power on cell test. So if there is any hardware issue, it will be detected at this phase, and if there is no issue, it will try to look for the iOS If the iOS is found, then it will try to look for the startup configuration, and if the startup configuration is found, it will just load the configuration and your router is up and running. If there is no startup configuration, of course, if it couldn't find anything saved, it will just run to an initial stage where there is nothing, no configuration there. This is quite important when you are working with Cisco IOS. There are three different major modes, I would say. First one, when the router boots up, it's called the user mode or user executive mode, where you have limited functionality. You can only run certain commands here. And most of your work will be done in either privilege mode or configuration mode. So you boot your router into your user mode, and then you give a command called enable. We will see this later as well. So when you give the command enable, it will go to privilege mode, and after the privilege mode, you can do certain type of activities there, but no configuration can be made there. So you have to, if you want to make any configuration changes, you have to go to the global configuration mode. So you give a command called configure terminal, and you'll be going into the router configuration mode. There are other configuration modes, but from the global configuration mode, you can go to interface configurations, router configuration, routing configuration, and other type of configuration terminals are there. But basically, you are already in configuration, so the major name for the mode is configuration mode. So there is another very helpful feature in Cisco IOS. If you give a question mark anywhere in the prompt, it will show you what are the available commands after that. So you can sort of give question mark after typing part of a command. So it will show what are the other options available, or how you may be able to complete that command. So let's say if you are trying to ping to a device, you just give the command ping space, then you might not know what should come after that. You can type in question mark and it will show you what should go there. The other thing is, if you write pi and just press tab, it will try to complete the command as well with the best guess or the best match, I would say. The other thing with Cisco IOS is you can use shortened forms of commands. Like instead of show, you can write ship protocols, misalnya. So in that case, ship prot would do. There are, as we discussed, other shortcuts as well. So just have a look through them. If your command has an error or it's ambiguous, it will just say so and indicate with a marker if there is an invalid input. We'll see this when we go into packet tracer in more detail. So these are a few basic router commands. Let's try them in packet tracer.